Chicken Soup for the Soul. This is chapter 16 of Author Talks with Lisa T, and coming up, I chat with Lynda Cohen Loigman about her new book, The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern, which is all about second chances at love and the healing power of words. Plus, for all you aspiring authors out there, she shares how she deals with writer's block.
So some people might guess from the title of this new book of yours, this is a romance story, but your main character is a woman about to turn 80, not your usual heroine in these types of stories. Can you tell us a little bit more about, dare I call it, your geriatric fairy tale?
Sure. Well, when the story opens, Augusta is right about to turn 80 years old. It's a month until her 80th birthday, and she has been forced to retire. She's a pharmacist, so that's the important thing to know about her. And she's been doing that her whole life. She never married, she never had children. Um, and she's been lying about her age for years to her employer. And so she kind of gets caught and she moves to Florida to retire. She moves to an active senior retirement community. And on her very first day there, she runs into someone at the swimming pool. She sort of gets out of the pool after doing her laps because she's like absolutely, fit, ready to go all the time. And someone calls out her nickname, this nickname that she hasn't heard for 60 years from behind her. And she's only let two people in this world call her that name. And she turns around, and there is Irving Rifkin, the man who was the delivery boy at her father's pharmacy and who broke her heart 60 years earlier. So then I take you back to 1920s Brooklyn to find out what went wrong between the two of them and where Augusta's life and career and sort of everything took a path that leads her to be in the place that she's in when she's 80 years old.
I love that when we first meet Irving, we kind of know what his whole character is by his pickup line, and I don't want to spoil it. But, but I laughed out loud when I read that in the book.
Yeah. He says something about her derriere. So that's how, he sees her in her bathing suit. There's something so horrifying about the idea of like seeing someone you haven't seen for decades, right? When you're in your dripping wet bathing suit, like not even a dry bathing suit, but like dripping wet, and you're just like feeling like, ugh, and he goes to hug her and she's just like icked. He gives her like the ick in a major way. It's just not pretty.
Like you said, what's wonderful about the story is that we get to meet Augusta when she's this young, hopeful teen who first falls in love. And then we see her as a woman who's older, never married, but was really successful in her career. And as always, you do a fantastic job weaving these two timelines together. What prompted you to choose the 1920s as your first timeline and then the 1980s as your quote unquote modern timeline?
Since I've known my husband, I've heard stories about his great grandmother. And his great grandmother was a pharmacist, and she graduated from pharmacy college in 1921 in New York. And her husband actually, she was married to a guy who was a pharmacist, and he died very young, unexpectedly. She had a 2-year-old child, and she went to school to keep the pharmacy. And she actually lied about her age because she had that store for many years, sold it, worked in hospitals, and lied about her age for a very long time. Like, remember whiteout? Like, she used to white out her certificate and photocopy it because you used to be able to do that before everything was on computer. And so I loved the idea. I started researching pharmacies. I mean, this book is definitely got a lot of romance, but there's a lot of history to it too. So it's historical. There's a lot of historical research that went into it. So I started reading memoirs of pharmacists in the 1920s to sort of learn what that was like, and in New York especially. And they had such an interesting role in their communities because they were like your priest and your rabbi and your confessor, and they knew, you would go to the pharmacist before you would go to the doctor. And just all the products that they sold on the shelves and the soda counters, people sitting at the soda counter in the pharmacy and sipping their ice cream sodas, and all of that whole setting just really appealed to me. And I had sort of always wanted to write a story with that setting, but I had no character, like I knew about my husband's great grandmother, but that was the setting that really drew me in. And then at the same time, my dad, when it was time for me to write my next book, I was moving my dad into an assisted living facility in Florida. And I spent a lot of time with him sitting in the lobby there with a lot of elderly people. And it was more like being in a middle school cafeteria is my line. That's what I like to say, because, they were flirting, and everybody was still, it wasn't like that spark had died. They all were looking for companionship and love and romance and all, all of it. Like this was what was going on. And so I loved the idea of using the 1920s. And of course, once you pick, I sort of always pick my earlier timeline first because that's my historical anchor. And once I pick that, then of course, like the 80s, it just follows because she can't live forever and she can't, so you can't have like you could have 100-year-old, heroine looking for love, but that seemed to strain credulity a little bit. So I picked the 80s because that was it sort of followed, from the 1920s, but I picked the 1920s first.
I do love the soap opera drama aspect of this
Yeah.
retirement community with love triangles and everything
Yeah.
else going on.
Yep. Yeah.
So in the book, Augusta is greatly influenced by her great aunt Esther, who comes to live with her family, and she quickly becomes famous in the Brooklyn neighborhood for her chicken soup and her homeopathic remedies. But of course, she's had to deal with being labeled as a witch because she dares to do something that men do and like to tell her she can't do. You really do dive into the struggles that women had to deal with at that particular time.
I can only imagine what like my husband's great grandmother went through trying to take over that store. Can you imagine your husband dies and then you're coming in and saying, I'm taking it over, and the flack that she must have gotten from so many of the employees once their sympathy for her for losing her husband wore off, and the Matchmaker's Gift had the same kind of struggle with the main character there, who was a matchmaker at a time when most of the matchmakers were men, and they were very unhappy because she had this gift that they didn't have. And Esther is similar in that way. She has a great facility for healing. She really understands all of the herbs and everything that it takes. And she also, she's a little bit mystical. Like she believes in something else. She believes she believes in the science 100%. She claims just as hard as Augusta's father, who's a pharmacist, and owns the pharmacy in the story, has studied, but she was never given the opportunity to go to college or to have that formal education. Her education came from other women, in her village, came from just walking in the woods and learning about the herbs and the plants. So she's called a witch, whereas somebody else who's a man who might have her career would be called an apothecary or be called a pharmacist. And there's just, that's something that I think it's just with us today. It's not, we all know as many strides as women have made, it's not an equal playing field, right? Like we could talk for hours and days and weeks and months and years about all of that, but we're not going to. But I just think it's important to have that in the story. It's important for Esther to have to face those struggles because they're real. They're not made up,
I highlighted a line from your book that I think you should have printed on t-shirts.
Okay.
To ignorant men, every gifted woman is a witch.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think there's that idea, right? Like that if a woman succeeds at something when a man hasn't, she must have had not necessarily magical powers, but some sort of advantage, right? Like she's a nepo baby. The kids would say today. She has something. If a man and a woman equally matched, or even not equally matched, if the man isn't as talented at a job and the woman gets the promotion or the woman gets the job, there's always going to be that feeling that the woman got it not because of her actual talent, not because of her gifts, but because of something else. Either she's seducing the boss, or she knows the boss from childhood, or whatever. And in this case, it's, well, she must be a witch. She must have something, some sort of magical something, and that's unfair. It's this idea that it's unfair, and then that leads to anger and resentment and the Salem witch trials, whatever, lots of stuff. But yeah, I just think that's something that we see a lot. And I think there's been a lot of exploration of that in literature, in a lot of books, especially this time of year, October, it's the witchy month. It's our spooky season, and there'll be a lot of great witch books, coming out. But, this is not a witch book, but there is that mystical aspect to Esther.
Well, and the Matchmaker's Gift also had like this kind of magical realism in it. Yeah. When you sit to write a story like this, do you automatically know what that element of magic's going to be, or does it come to you as you start fleshing out these characters in the story?
the matchmaker's gift, I knew she would have like a gift for making matches, but wasn't sure what it would be. Like, would she hear bells? Would she, I settled on like a very visual gift. She sort of sees light. Um, and that stemmed from the research actually, because I had found like stories about this man who sold eyeglasses and he was on the Lower East Side. And so I loved the idea that character would have very poor vision physically, but this like inner vision that would let her see light. So in other words, she can't see the color of the awning in front of her, or she can't read the words, like, and she's got these thick glasses, but like that doesn't matter. If there are two people near her who she thinks should be matched, she can somehow see that. So I loved that idea. For this book, it was different. I had that pharmacy. I wanted to write another book with magical realism because I had so much fun writing The Matchmaker's Gift. And my first two books were much more serious. So they kind of go in pairs in my mind. The first two, and then the third, The Matchmaker's Gift, and this one. So the first two and the second two kind of are little pairs, in my mind.
Brooklyn cousins.
Yeah, they're cousins. So when I wanted to write magical realism in this book, and I had this idea, this inspiration in the form of my husband's great grandmother, the pharmacy setting was perfect for that, right? Because there's all kinds of powders and ingredients on the shelves, and it's very, you're making medicine, you're making potions, you're making things that people are going to ingest, and somehow that just seems perfect to add a little dash of something, a little sparkle, so that it was very easy to figure out how it would work this time around. And then also when I came up with the character of Esther, there was something else in my head. I knew that the first person she would heal would be someone that I won't say it, but it's someone that Augusta knows and cares about a lot. And chicken soup is such a healing thing, and our mothers and our grandmothers always make it for us, no matter what your culture is. You could be Jewish, but you could be Italian, but you could be anything, Greek, whatever it is. There's some kind of chicken soup that they make for you, right? Whichever it is, if it's, and in the Jewish culture, they call chicken soup Jewish penicillin. And when I sort of remembered that as I was writing, and I was like, well, that's perfect. Like, because I want to use that in the book, but then I couldn't really use that in the book because penicillin came later. Like, it wasn't in the 1920s. So I couldn't call it penicillin. I couldn't call the chicken soup that.
But I'm pretty sure your readers who know that that's what it's called picked up on it,
Yeah.
because I actually wrote it down in my notes. I was like, how do I work this in there? And then I knew what she was doing.
Yeah. No, 100%. Actually, that took me down like a weird research path too, because penicillin, the history of penicillin is so fascinating because it was around, but then it wasn't mass produced until World War II. And then they made like gigantic, they had to make it in such huge quantities to send overseas, like for soldiers, to fight off infection on the battlefield. And there were women, there was like there was a production facility in New York somewhere. Now I've forgotten where it is. And there were women who, like young women, they had to feed the mold to grow it. Like, and so there were women who did that. Like, that was their job. And they were called like the penicillin girls, which I totally feel like someone's going to write a book about.
I was gonna say, maybe you found the subject for your next book.
I'm not going to write that book. I don't have I mean, all I know is like they sat around and they put sugar in the whatever in the mold. Like, but that sounds kind of boring, but it's like a catchy title, the penicillin girls. So someone's going to write it.
So I know the Matchmaker's Gift had been inspired by a newspaper article that you came across.
Yeah.
And I had now that you told me it's your husband's great aunt, I was trying to figure out, I wonder what inspired this story. And I thought, well, maybe you had a mortar and pestle or an apothecary case that you had passed through generations or something. You decided to finally write that story.
Yeah, no, it was my husband's great grandmother. Actually, so people won't be able to see this. You can see it, but since the listeners can't, but I have my husband's great grandmother's mortar and pestle.
Oh, wow.
Like this brass thing, I'll clink it so people can hear it. But yeah, my mother-in-law has let me keep this on my desk while I was writing this story and working on it. She keeps asking for it back. And I'm like, can I just have it a little bit longer for like book clubs and Zooms and things? Because I want to show people. Yeah. So it's funny. So with the cover of this book, again, I feel bad because people can't see this, but the cover of this book has a mortar and pestle on it. And in the first draft of the cover, it was white. And I asked if they could make it a brass color because that in the story, that's what it is. And it's that because that's what this one, my husband's great grandmother's one is. But hers does not have the words inside that are in Esther's.
Well, that's where some of the magic comes in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So every family has that one dish they always make everybody when they're not feeling well.
Mhm.
Is it chicken soup in your family or is it something else?
I mean, definitely I make chicken soup, but I remember when my son was little, I would know if he was sick or really sick. Like I would know if he had to go to the doctor if he wouldn't eat a donut. Like if he had a really bad cold and like I would get him a treat, I would always get him a donut because he loved donuts. And so if he ate the donut, he was okay. Like not that he would go to school if he had a fever or something, but I knew like he didn't need to go to the doctor. But if he would not eat the donut, then we had to go to the pediatrician.
I was hoping a little bit that there might have been like Esther's recipe in the back of your book, but because she never measures anything or makes it the same way
Right.
twice, it would just be like a list of ingredients, put
Right.
it with water in a pot, done.
Yep. Yep, exactly. My mom was a cook like that. Like she had recipes, but she didn't follow them exactly. There was nothing exacting about the way she cooked, and things would always taste different. But the good thing about that is it's fun, it's creative. The bad thing is like if you make it really good one time and you were like, let's recreate that one, you can't even remember what you did
Nope.
to make it work really well that time. Whatever it is, who knows?
It's like a flash of like lightning in a bottle, right?
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
At one point in the book, Esther does tell Augusta words can do anything.
Hmm.
Do you believe that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think words are incredibly important. You know, the older I get, the more I really believe that words have so much power to heal things between people, to heal disputes and fights, and especially like among families. I think kindness and kind words and open, honest words can really go so far. And even when you have, I mean, we all have relatives, right, who we think they wouldn't respond, and you don't even try to talk to them, right? Or friends or whatever it is. You just think, but I really believe that people will listen if you speak to them with a very open heart and in a very honest, very kind way. There's a way to talk to people that I really believe can be very healing. So I do. I think the older I get, I've seen that more and more. So I do. I believe. I mean, I think is it Alice Hoffman? It might somebody said like, or no, maybe it was I don't know. Some author that I like, but now I can't remember which one. I think it's one of those quotes that when you open Goodreads, that sometimes they have quotes from authors and it's there sometimes and it's like words may well be our only real magic, you know. Someone said that. And I do, I kind of believe that. Not that it's the only magic. I think there's a lot of different kinds of real magic in the world. Love is very magical. I mean, my daughter is getting married in January, and just watching them, to watch young love is just like I could cry every time I think about it because it's so beautiful and it is so magical. There are a lot of things in this life that just feel very special and just very like, I don't know, like such gifts that we have. But words can definitely be that.
It's about being open to the words and being open to the magic around us,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yeah.
So where in time are you going to take us next?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, my next book, I think it's this one's a tough nut to crack, but I think it's going to go back. It's going to do a lot of different. It's going to be a lot of different time periods. It's not going to be a dual timeline book, but it's going to have a lot of flashbacks to a lot of different time periods. There'll definitely be um, the 50s and 60s, so there'll be a bunch from there.
Are we still in New
That's
York?
um, I think we're going to be in New York. We're going to be in New York, but there's going to be little pop-ins to a lot of different places. Um, some like European cities, and I haven't quite settled on somewhere. I think Western Massachusetts will be in Western Massachusetts. Yeah, it's a very bookish book, so it's about books and about someone sort of searching for a book that a woman who has like a dreams of a book like for as long as she can remember, and she sort of always wants to find it, but it connects her to her past and to her true self, but she sort of spends her life looking for this book, so she has to go to some iconic bookstores, you know
That sounds like a
Yeah.
reader's dream.
Yeah, it's a fun story, but it's a tough nut. It's really a tough nut to crack. I'm having a hard time getting it, but I think I finally got it. Like it's finally opening up in front of me. Like I can finally, the pieces are falling into place. So that feels good.
From a writer's point of view, when you reach that point where you've run into not necessarily a block, but
Yeah.
you're trying to push this story out, what do
Yeah.
you do to counter that?
I mean, I've just tried to be really patient with myself. I mean, I'm not, there are writers who write a book every year and who have contracts for a book every year. And I'm not one of those people. I could never, ever do that. I admire those people tremendously, but it's just not, I can't do it. So I just give myself time. I'm not in a rush. I'm not, I don't know. This year I really should have written a lot and I didn't. There was a lot going on. Um, all the way around, and I could not get this story right. And I think I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and that, of course, stopped me from really getting it together. But I think for me, I need times of rest. I can't be working all the time. I think you need to experience life to be able to write about life. And so it's sort of, there's just seasons for everything. So I'm just very gentle with myself. I mean, but then again, I'm not on a crazy deadline, so I can be. Um, but there are seasons when I need to just live and seasons when I need to write. And I don't know, but I've missed it. It leaves me, I feel a little empty when I don't have, I love having like a secret special world that I can just go to, especially at night. Like when I fall asleep, when I'm really in the middle of a book, I just sort of turn over and I totally go into the book and I totally go into that world. And when I don't have that, then at night, I don't like, it's harder for me to fall asleep,
Hmm.
you know? So I'm happy now. Now I'm sleeping well again because I can turn over and I just go there and that's
Good.
fine.
I'm glad to hear that. And and also that's great. I think that's great advice for anyone who's trying to write and
Yeah.
maybe thinks that everyone has it so easy. And
Yeah.
it's, to hear something from someone as successful as you are with several published books under your belt, like, that's that's something that people struggle with.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I still write every day, but it's like with this book I write different scenes and I write different things and they're not all making it in. They're not all working.
Mhm.
But I think it's important to not I do think it's important to keep going. It's not that I'm giving up. I know I'm just being patient and I know it'll come, but I have to keep going. You have to keep pushing. So, but it can take a really long time.
We've been talking with Lynda Cohen Loigman. The new book is The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. Lynda, thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you at the end of the month in Westchester.
That would be great. Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you.
And that's where we close the book on this chapter. If you happen to find yourself in New York on October 25th, come out and meet Lynda at an event happening in Westchester. It's being hosted by my good friends at the Compass 51 Reading Series, and tickets are available now. I'll be putting up a link on Instagram at Lisa T Books. That's also where you'll find my spooky 13 countdown to Halloween. And if you can't wait until Halloween, head over to my Patreon page where you can read the full list if you sign up to become a member. You'll also get access to my monthly newsletter, plus other things like suggested reading and archived interviews. All of that at patreon.com/LisaTBooks. Enough business. Let's get back to reading. I'm Lisa T.